Wrestling, and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotello Esquire, Mike Lano, and Evan Ginzburg. Why don't you introduce our special guest for tonight, Mike?
I brought and asked him. I've been nagging him for many, many months when I heard he had some, at least one, maybe several dark matches for AEW. But he's our own, my home base, APW trained, APW superstar Dave Dutra, held many, many titles, had feuds with all the greats when Roland was still alive and continued to work. When Marcus took over, we want to pay tribute right from the get-go and for most of the show. Last week, it was our friend Candy Devine. This week, we lost Donna Day, who was trained by Cora and Debbie Combs, wrestled all over the world, Japan. She was on several, Debbie and her mom, Cora, both two legends. Their Nashville indie promotion in the 90s. She wrestled everywhere. We also lost amazing Jonathan, who Evan and I can talk about. He loved pro wrestling, but he was a fantastic magician, comic in Vegas for many years. And our special guest, of course, Dave Dutra. So, Dave, why don't you break right in and tell us what is going on with you? Where have you been wrestling? Are you going to AEW, or are you? Is Dave Dutra AEW all in?
I'm not contracted anywhere. I will take anything that comes my way as far as opportunities go. AEW was simply an opportunity for me. At that point, it's mainly just extra work. There was an opportunity for me to head out to Florida for taping and do an AEW dark match. So that presented itself. I took up on it. It's been a while since I did that. So I don't think anything really came of it. But, as is wrestling, you get opportunities. Sometimes, you're in right place, right time. Sometimes you got to continue the grind. So in that case,
who did you have the dark match with? Who did you have the dark match?
That was with Ricky Starks. And this was during the pandemic. In fact, the AEW dark match was the very first match that I had post-pandemic, meaning post the start of it. I hadn't wrestled at that point in like 8 months. And AEW was one of the only things running at the time. There's a lot of protocol you had to go through. You had to take blood work. You had to go through all these checkpoints just to get on site to tape it. So that was that. And, New Japan Strong was another one I had an opportunity to do. Same deal. I'm not contracted to New Japan, but, an opportunity presented itself, and went out there and did a taping there, wrestled Brody King. And, wow. I still take them as they come, and wrestling is always, as you guys know, like wrestling's a grind. You have to just keep chugging along and, take them as they come.
Does it give you pride to see, for example, New Japan, Carl Fredericks was one of the first picks, but look at AEW, and from the get-go, it feels like a lot of APW guys. I would go down and shoot most all the Pro Wrestling Guerrilla shows where Jungle Boy was, feuding, but you get Jungle Boy there, our Will Hobbs, Brian Cage, at least, the first year and a half of AEW, who wrestled a ton, although he comes from, the mid part of Modesto, Stockton part of California, sure. And some others, the Bucks and Cody and all of that, they were all first in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and they did X amount of shows in Northern Cal. So it gives me a lot of pride in seeing our guys there and more than I've mentioned. And then having, I emailed you right after I saw you were on the dark. So tell us more about your experiences. And did you see Will and some of your other APW brothers there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Will, more than anybody, is the one I think APW people are most proud of, because Will Hobbs is the guy who actually trained from the ground up from APW. A lot of those other guys you mentioned worked APW shows, but were not necessarily trained through the APW boot camp like Will was. So to see Will have the success he's had there, that's a bright spot, I think, for anyone who came through APW. And I did see him. In fact, I spent a lot of time before the taping with him. He was like my workout partner while I was out there in Florida. We grabbed, lunch, dinner, that kind of thing. So I leaned heavily on Will while I was there, just to get some pointers and, the do's and don'ts, since he at that time had been there for just about a year. The other guys too are, they're obviously, it was cool to see. I caught up with Brian Cage Jungle Boy, guys who weren't necessarily like APW born and bred, but they were guys who worked APW quite a lot. AEW does have a great West Coast representation, and I think that has a lot to do with the Young Bucks, primarily being based in LA. And then Cody, who during his independent run, when he left WWE and before AEW, he established a pretty solid relationship with Marcus and APW. They did a string of events in 2000, I want to say 2017, which led to that big Cow Palace show they did, where for an independent, selling about 3,000 tickets was pretty impressive. And Cody was a huge part of that. I think they did a steel cage main event with Joey Ryan,
Right.
that helped push that show over the top. So Cody, with his knowledge of APW and being somewhat, at least partially in charge of AEW, I think that helped tremendously in helping to get guys like Will Hobbs opportunities, because he was familiar with the whole APW roster and he knew guys that had potential that, could really be assets to AEW.
Very quick, and then I'll throw to Evan and Russ. I shot all of Cody's matches for APW, and there was, I think it was the Pacifica show, him against Pentagon. Remember that one? That was a huge match. And, it was very cool because that first Cow Palace show, I posed Cody and Brandy with Pat Patterson, who Dusty was our very last U.S. champion when Roy threw in the towel and closed the office in January after his Battle Royal 1982. And Dusty was the last champion because the last three Roy Shire shows, he had to use Eddie Graham's Florida TV. And so he had Dusty on all those last three cards, etc. But Chris Daniels used to come up to APW. His first match in APW was early '98. He came up there with the Suicide Kid. He was constantly up there bringing some of the Ron Rivera Lucha guys, like Scorpio Sky, who was wearing a hood. If you've seen any of the tape in APW, he came up a zillion times with Joey Ryan, Disco Machine, etc. But Scorpio Sky, skinny kid, mask on, tremendous talent. Frankie Kazarian, of course, and a lot of those other guys. Samoa Joe started coming up with the relationship between Roland and Rick Bassman's Orange County, right near where I am now, Orange County group. And they were part of King of the Indies, which blew up everything, started Ring of Honor, Evolve, all that Gabe Sapolsky stuff. So let me throw to Evan, since we're talking about Ring of Honor and all this history and stuff culminating in APW or AEW.
Yeah. So Dave, what do you consider some of your career highlights?
So, I sort of break my career out into like my first, I retired from wrestling for like 3 or 4 years in the mid 2010s. So I sort of break that up into two pieces. Prior to 2014 or 2015, because I retired at the end of 2014. I took a step away from the business for a few years and came back. So in the first half of that, so, the 2000s up until 2014, I think the indies were a little cold comparatively till now. So there weren't as many opportunities. There was a lot of APW stuff, but I do have a match I'm particularly proud of. I wrestled Drake Younger in the APW garage in a killer ladder match. I think to this day, anything up until that date, that 2014 era in APW, I think it has the highest hit count on YouTube. You can find that match there. It was just really special. Drake Younger at that time in his career was pretty hot on the indies. So getting a chance to work with him gave you a little internet buzz. We did somewhat of a work shoot with that. I had gone in there and it insinuated that Drake Younger may have like a blood transmitted disease because of
He had Hep B, right?
Yeah, or
it was
like
legit.
That. I said something to that effect, that I refused to work with someone who could have a blood transmitted disease from all the death matches he does. And until he can prove to me that he's clean in that sense, I'm not going to wrestle him. And in a time where, especially now, like now that probably would have gotten me canceled. on social media, but we put that out there on YouTube and Twitter and whatnot, and it actually caught wind of like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and then they published an article about it. So we developed a little bit, and a lot of guys, even in my own like Northern California circle, questioned whether it was legitimate or not. So we were trying to work the boys a little bit too. So we created a little bit of buzz, which I really loved. And then we had the match, and the match was, to this day, I've seen it maybe a couple weeks, or not weeks, couple years ago. I rewatched it, and it still holds up well. On the second side of my career, when I came back in 2017, I mean, my first true event that I did was the second APW Cow Palace show. They had brought me back as a referee because we actually carried over the storyline of how I got retired by Rick Luxury. So the angle was, I could no longer legally wrestle because when I got retired, the stipulation was my career was on the line. And the idea behind it was I would continue to screw Rick Luxury over by refereeing his matches until he wanted to beat me up so badly that the only way he could do that is to rescind the contract from 2014 and say, you know what, I want you to wrestle because I want to kick your ass, so I'm going to break the contract and you can wrestle again. So we wrapped that up at the Cow Palace, and that was so amazing for me to do that in front of like 3,000 people. We eventually did a series with him. Past that point, I did a really cool extra work with WWE. I had done extra work with WWE for years, doing a lot of little silly things. I was a paramedic. I was a police officer. I was a security guard, all these little spots, right? But I never got to actually wrestle. So I did a little thing with the Yolo County tag champions where they made little cardboard belts for us. And we had to do a little 60-second match against Heavy Machinery on an episode of SmackDown. What was cool about that is, as silly and stupid as it was to give us cardboard belts and put us on national TV with those and sort of make a mockery of indie wrestlers. The joke was on WWE because it was so silly that it became viral. And then what ended up happening is AJ Kirsch and I were able to take that episode and then start making cardboard titles at home. And we sold those pieces of cardboard at indie shows. Wow. And we're not kidding you. We sold pieces of cardboard with markers that we drew for like $25 to $35 a pop for cardboard. Just so you ride the wave of that. It only lasted a couple of weeks before it sort of calmed down, but it's about capitalizing and evolving. And I also got to do like a episode of bar wrestling down in LA, which at the time when bar wrestling was hot, that was a big deal. A lot of big names that are now in AEW were on that show. Your Luchasaurus, your Jungle Boys, all those guys. The AEW Dark, that was a really cool thing. I changed my character to the Battle King, which is what I primarily do now. And the very first time I was able to use that character was the AEW Dark match. I was actually set to debut it in March of 2020. But as you all aware, in early March of 2020, everything shut down in California. So I was ready to roll the character out for APW, but that never happened. So I did it at AEW Dark for the first time and moved on with that. And the New Japan Strong was a very cool opportunity, a highlight of mine, because I've always wanted to wrestle for New Japan. Sort of the fan in myself, I've always wanted to hear my name announced by a Japanese ring announcer. Like, the New Japan announcers, how the tone in which they announce.
The voice like trails out. Dave Dutra.
Yeah, it's like Dave Dutra.
Yes.
So like I got to hear that in the ring and that was sort of like a dream of mine because I had been watching New Japan, for at least a decade earlier. I'm like, God, that'd be so awesome to do that. And so I got to, check that box and then there's some great wrestling now. There's more young talent now that are like amazingly good. Usually you at least when I first broke in, a lot of the newer guys just showed their greenness, for lack of a better term. But now there's guys who are 1 or 2 years into the business that wrestle like they're 8 to 10 years in the business. So there's a lot of hungry young talent that are extraordinarily great, and to have opportunities to work with younger guys and go out there and kill it. It's a great time in wrestling. I'm sorry that was a super long-winded answer, but
no, that's great. I just have one other quick question.
yeah,
Muhammad Ali, he lost 3 or 4 years in his prime because of his legal issues. And they always said that hurt his career. Do you feel as a wrestler missing 3 or 4 years, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe your body didn't take as much of a pounding and you're more refreshed.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, entirely possible. The joke is that and this wasn't planned in any way, but when I left in 2014, that was right before the indie wrestling scene really did take a boom. 2015, they redid the King of Indies in California, and
It's
this
part
is
of the
really when
WrestleMania down in San Jose, right?
yes, the WrestleMania in San Jose, and I'm not sure if that triggered it, but I swear to you, I got out of the business and all of a sudden I'm seeing shows get 300, 400, 500, 600 people sellouts in high school gyms. And that never happened a lot when I was in the business, like, years earlier. And then you got Cody Rhodes, like doing indie dates and helping sell out buildings. And it blew up. So that 3 years I was gone, there was a lot of boom periods. So you could say like, oh, maybe I missed some opportunities there. But on the flip side, you're right. 3 years off was 3 years of wear and tear that did not occur on my body. So that definitely, I mean, everyone has what I call a bump card. There's only a certain amount of bumps you could take before your body. And I could tell you right now that, I mean, I'm a little older now. I'm like 37. So, and I'm feeling everything more day to day versus, at 35 versus at 30. And so,
wait until you're north of 40 and you'll really start feeling.
I know, like, I'm funny about like body recovery. I literally just posted a video today about a few hours ago. I went and did cryotherapy today to try to help my recovery a little bit. And you stand in these chambers that get down to negative 170 degrees. Wow. You do it for a few minutes and it just like, it rejuvenates your body. I need that kind of stuff because I wrestled 2 killer matches last week. I just wrestled last night. So I was just sort of feeling it again. I don't recover as fast as I did 10 years ago in my 20s.
Because I don't know what's going on up there. I know the South San Francisco thing is hot with the Daniel Garcias and all of the Suzuki, but Marcus hasn't quite started yet. But so who have you been wrestling on?
No, sure, yeah. So the last 3 shows I've done. Last weekend there was one in Alameda Point called Stars of Wrestling. Right. Yeah, so wrestled a match out there. Do you remember Icebox
Thompson? Yeah.
I started the promotion. He picked me and Tony Fury. Tony Hernandez asked us to start this thing. I gave it the name of Oaktown Championship Wrestling, but Ice, who I knew from roller derby, had begged me to bring him to wrestling. He wanted to get involved in wrestling. He'd been, with the roller derby, the latest incarnation of the Bay Bombers. So I bring him to Robert Thompson School at AP Dub. He attends one class, quits because he couldn't handle it, and then kind of screwed some people over on money paydays at first show. So I completely dropped out when Kirk White, he like drove off and said, I know I owe you some money. I'll catch you on the flip side. And he drove off to Vegas. So, but he mellowed out. He got away from Kirk White and whatever. And so I shot all the Alameda stuff, which happened like a mile from where I lived. And it's where we used to hang out with Shad Gaspard before he died. And he died, down here. I picked him up and drove him to LA Comic Con once I moved down back after 40 years away from LA, drove him to LA Comic Con, and a couple of months later he drowned, saving his son out there. But Shad's tag partner JTG was in the main event of the show you were on in Alameda.
Yes, yeah. So he main evented that show. It was a great little show. They got a good little venue over there right off the water. They got maybe 200, 250 people there. Can't complain. The show that following day on Sunday, so a week ago today, was the UGWA running a venue for the first time outside of San Jose, because San Jose is their home base, but they lost their venue. So they were sort of rolling the dice on this new San Francisco venue. And it ended up being the biggest show in their company's history. So they got about 350 people. They packed this little I want to say it's like a theater, a 3-story theater that has been converted into a bar and arcade. So there's arcade machines, there's alcohol. They put the ring at the bottom of the whole theater, so everyone's on the first, second, and third floor. They're all rowdy, they're drinking. So it's sort of a party atmosphere. If you guys are familiar with like a hood slam.
I was going to say, hood slam, you get high from the smoke, the wafting.
Yeah, so they're very similar kind of party atmosphere, and fans, they may not be like, a lot of these people to me are very casual wrestling fans. They're people that probably maybe followed the Attitude Era but fell out of wrestling a little bit, and they just want to see action, and they don't really care what it is. So they're just like happy to be there and be entertained. So they're very easy fans to wrestle in front of because they just cheer for everything. So it was a really awesome event. And then who's
the promoter and who else was on that show?
So Anthony Trevino is the promoter of the UGWA. He's on Facebook.
Not familiar with him.
Yeah, well, as far as the professional scene, he's relatively new comparatively to others, but he's been doing really great out in San Jose, and he's now doing San Francisco stuff. So as far as who's on there, I'm the champion currently. He does use a lot of NorCal and Southern California and Vegas talent, and especially with the Vegas right now. There's a Vegas scene. A lot of young indie wrestlers that are talented. So he's using a lot of young guys. I feel like at 37, I'm like the oldest guy on the roster.
I should say, Evan and the rest of you have seen Dave Dutra. Tremendous promos and tremendous mat skill.
I've seen Dave.
Look.
In fact, that was one thing I was going to bring up.
And Dave may not know that Evan was the producer, assistant, or associate producer on the Wrestler movie with Mickey Rourke, with all the
nice.
Ring of Honor, Ron Killing's talent. I emailed you about that Evans had the history.
But what I wanted to do was, Dave, I wanted to go back a little bit more towards your beginning days with Pro Wrestling Iron. And, how you got started. Because that's how I know you, is from PWI. And it was a very different thing. Can you tell everyone what the big deal was about Pro Wrestling Iron and why it changed things for the Bay Area for at least the time that it was around?
Yeah, definitely. And let me wrap up that last question real quick, because yesterday was a couple of firsts for me with the booking I did yesterday. I got to wrestle a couple Lucha Libre legends. So I got to wrestle, it was a tag team match, and we wrestled Psychosis and Dr. Wagner Jr.
Yeah. No mask?
So,
mask on?
He came out with the mask and rips it off. So no mask, but it's these guys are, I got to think they're in their late 50s at this point. But great guys, and it was just awesome. They sold out Mount Pleasant High School in San Jose, and to what the COVID limited capacity was, which I think was about 850 people.
Wow.
Amazing show. They for our match, they actually crumpled up dollar bills. They were throwing money into the ring afterwards from the performance. So really
promoter of that one. And it's like, how is Gabe Ramirez allowing all this stuff to go on? He doesn't try to fight it, or was he part of it?
Allowing what part?
Well, he at times has been kind of territorial or whatever, because that's kind of, I think, where he's emanating out of. Not that we have territories in Northern California.
So this show was Gabe's show. This was a pro wrestling. Yeah.
So Pro Wrestling
Revolution. Yeah.
Okay.
So this was his show, and he's really the only promoter, in my opinion. People have their opinions of Gabe, but I think he's really the only guy in this region that can sell that kind of tickets. He has the promoting power to do that. I haven't seen any other promoter that can consistently fill venues of 800 to 1,200 people on a monthly basis. So, credit to him on that. Now to circle back to the beginning of my career with Iron, how that sort of came about is I did an embarrassingly large amount of backyard wrestling as a kid, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. In 2003 when I started Ayrron, it was a very taboo subject. You sort of got, I don't want to say blackballed, but you got labeled if you mentioned or publicly stated that you at all did backyard wrestling, when in reality, most people that get into the wrestling business at some point messed around with their friends and, and pretended to do the moves you saw on TV. There was a guy who did volunteer work for Roland at APW. He did video work for Roland. He dubbed tapes for him for free. And the deal was that Roland would let him use the garage once a month to do his little backyard wrestling shows in.
Yeah.
And in exchange, he'd do all the video production for free. So at that point, kids are connecting up on America Online at the time and other platforms. There wasn't a Facebook or MySpace or any of that stuff yet. But I found out through some people that, hey, these guys could, use some new talent. So I went out there and I started wrestling in the garage, untrained, in 2002.
Were you smart yet?
No, not at all. Not at all. I was just a dumb kid at that point. But what ended up happening with that is he ran that for another maybe 8 months into the start of 2003, and he was going to be done with it. And I that was my first taste of wrestling in an actual ring. Before, we were wrestling on the grass, on trampolines, we were kids and we didn't know any better, so I'm like, wow, this was awesome. I want to continue to wrestle in a ring. And the guy was like, well, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. But I heard about this school, not APW, but another school that's, 2 exits down the freeway, called Pro Wrestling Ayrron. And they're going to be doing an open tryout. So maybe you should sign up. It's like $35 and you can win a contract to train there. I didn't know anything about Ayrron at the time. In fact, I didn't really know much about indie wrestling. It was all new to me at that point. But obviously, hindsight, now I know the history behind it. We all know that Roland and Mike Modest had a falling out. And Mike Modest was his prize student for quite some time. And I think a lot of it had to do with the deals that Mike and Donovan and Bison and all those guys got with Japan and Noah. I think Roland wanted to get a cut of it. I don't know all the specifics.
You're pretty close to being right on top of all that stuff.
And to me, the specifics don't even matter. But ultimately,
we were there at King of the Indies in 2001, where night 2 was when Russ, was it Bison against Donovan, and
where the meltdown happened.
And then basically Ayrron was created from Mike Modest and Donovan and Frank Murdoch taking pretty much all of the talent and the behind the scenes, the refs. There was very little left, and they all went over, other than maybe Vinny and Vic Grimes, and they all went and formed.
And remember, American Dragon,
the same trajectory that Misawa took all of the All Japan guys except Kawada and formed Noah. And Noah was the deal where Modest, Morgan, and Bison had their touring thing. So they took that contract away from APW to form Ayrron. And it was insane how it was so parallel to Noah Japan leaving All Japan and Mrs. Baba like a tyrant.
So
Roland was not a tyrant.
And so when I joined with Ayrron, I did the tryout in I want to say May of 2003. It was sometime in the middle of 2003 they did a tryout there. They brought in Crash Holly to be one of the judges for it. And they were going to piggyback the tryout into a show they were doing in San Francisco the following day, which they would announce on the show the winner of the tryout. I did see Scorpio Sky at that show masked, as you mentioned earlier. That's at that point he was a SoCal guy that was fully masked. So I remember that. But yeah, I ended up winning that tryout, and all these years later, and I think they interviewed Vito Tomaselli once about it, who was one of the trainers for Ayrron at that point. He was working at SPW, helping train Ayrron guys. They had interviewed him separately about this whole time frame, and he was saying how much of a work these tryouts were. And apparently, and this is, I shouldn't admit this because it sort of puts me down a little bit, but they chose me, and at the time I'm like, oh cool, like I was the best student there. But in that interview, they actually were talking about how they were trying to choose the guy to win it that they felt would not pay for training if they didn't win. So apparently they looked at me as, if he doesn't win, he's probably not going to pay us to train. So let's give him the win, and let's identify the guys who, even if they don't win, we could probably talk them into paying full price. So they gave it to me, and then the other guys they gave runner-up deals to. And, as wrestling can be very carny, they're like, hey, look, you have all the potential in the world. What we're going to do for you, we would never really do for anybody else. But if you sign up today, we're going to knock off $1,000 off your training. It's normally $4,000, but we're going to give it to you for $3,000 if you sign a contract right now. And that's how these tryouts were meant to hook people to increase their sign up revenue and help the school. So they signed up a bunch of guys that day. I got the free pass, and I trained there for 6 months. And the only reason I dropped out of it, well, there's a couple reasons for it. I don't think a lot of the people at Ayrron were in a good place emotionally, psychologically, and there was a tragedy that happened in that 6-month period I was there. Crash Holly passed away under bad circumstances, and that caused a ripple effect in the school because everyone was very close to him. Hold on one second. Sorry about that.
There we go.
I'm sorry about that. I'm using my cell phone, and someone actually tried to call me. So,
before you get too far into this, I don't know if you saw, but I shot his work, Mike Lockwood, Crash Holly, as Leprechaun Ayrron O'Grady, before he even, pretty much most of the guys, before they start working in front of people, they're training. And have you ever seen footage of Mike doing the Leprechaun Ayrron O'Grady stuff?
Ayrron O'Grady, yeah.
It's hilarious.
Definitely did.
It was hilarious. So stuff he did with Rosano and Vic Grimes and Modest. Parking lot with the killer death matches, and they go up and down the street in front of APW's garage.
Yeah, he was awesome, man. He was so good, so good. Great guy. But yeah, his death caused sort of a ripple effect among the people that ran the school: Murdoch, Morgan, and Modest. And Morgan was probably affected the worst as far as his emotional state. There was a lot of just like things that you would never think of now that they were doing. When you have the owners of the school smoking cigarettes like trains inside a small little warehouse while their students are trying to run laps in the warehouse, so you're just inhaling secondhand smoke while you're trying to train. And it's not a good environment to train in when you are being shown headlock takeovers, and then one trainer is drinking a Bud Light as you're learning, and then they go, let me show you how it's done, kid. And they set their beer on the canvas, and then they bump you with the headlock. The beer starts to pour all over the canvas.
Jeez.
They shouldn't have been drinking clearly while they were training young students, but they were. And I think that was like a coping mechanism. So there was a lot of things going on there, and I'm not trying to bury the school. I really am not. I mean, there were still guys that graduated from that school that were great. I do take some accountability that maybe at my young age, because I was only 18 at that time, I maybe not have been emotionally ready to be a wrestler either. But I think there were things that were going on there that you would never see in today's world, in wrestling schools, that sort of steered me away. Like maybe wrestling wasn't for me. And it wasn't until I left at the end of 2003, like December time. And then I didn't get back into it until I just happened to take a job. I was working at a warehouse in Hayward loading trucks. And JJ Perez was a salesman at that company working in the inside sales office. So he found out that like I used to be at Ayrron that I loved wrestling. And we would talk, all the time. Like he would basically come in every Monday and say about like all his weekend shenanigans doing these wrestling shows. And he said, "Man, you should come back and train. Like you should go to APW now. Go talk to Roland and whatnot." So I had finally made a call to Roland. Called me back immediately. Tried to hustle me to get me onto the July 2007 school camp. And Roland was always like, he's always working. Be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I reviewed your application, and got to tell you, kid, if I were to rate you on a letter grade scale, I think you would be an A- prospect. That's pretty good. I don't usually do that much. And I'll tell you what, we already started our July camp, but if we're already a week into July camp, and I never do this, Dave. But if you want to put a down payment down right now, I'll squeeze you into that class and let you come in a little bit late." And I told him, "Hey, man, Roland, I appreciate that, but you know what? I don't have $3,000 to give you right now. But sign me up for January. I'll take time. I'll save my money, and I'll be good by that point." So I started in January of 2008 training at APW. I breezed through the beginners camp only because it was the exact same material that Modest taught at Ayrron. He used APW's little training manual. So when I went through it at APW, it was literally word for word, verbatim, the same exact material. So breezed through the beginner stuff, and then the semi-pro stuff. I got to learn under JJ. And if any of you guys, are familiar with JJ Perez and all of his work,
Mr. Wrestling 4.
Oh yes, yeah.
He was a class
incredible
kid. He was a good person. I should say this at Ayrron. This is something I never saw before, and Evan will love it because Ring of Honor's Nigel McGuinness, total legend, came in. We picked him up at the airport. But on that show, I don't know if Russ was there or not, but he actually wrestled Sarah D'Amato.
Yeah.
It was like incredible. And now I want to know, because I'm trying to book Claudio Castagnoli, the former Cesaro who just left the WIF. And, he's mulling about his options. If he's still with Sarah, they were a couple for a long, long time. I snapped pictures of them at some Ring of Honor shows together. I don't know if they're together because she, of course, I think she's still the head female trainer at NXT.
I don't know if she's still there. I don't, for some reason, I don't think she is, but I could be wrong.
All the Hunter people, but she had quite the history. She started with AP Dub, as far as I know. Roland gave her the stupid wrestling name of Nikki, and then she left with all the Iron people, and that's where, some great success happened for her. And she, got about and Shimmer and Shine and all that stuff, and boom, she was one of the top females in the world. But she had a ton of matches at AP Dub with Melissa Anderson, which were terrific.
Oh, yeah, she definitely did. And I was just going to say, I don't know if she's there only because I did an NXT taping for WWE in October of 2021. So, maybe 5 months ago. So I was at the Performance Center, and I did not see her that whole time I was there. Saw a lot of people that, familiar faces. I saw Tom Castor, obviously. He refereed my match while I was out there. I saw Tim Thatcher. So
all our brothers.
Yeah, so it was really cool, but I didn't see Sarah.
What's his face was the head ref at NXT for years and years after he left us, and I emailed him, "Why aren't you the guy you had your ladder match with? Why aren't you wrestling? Why are you just reffing? It's a crazy misuse of talent." He goes, "Hey, I'm happy. I've got insurance. I've got all this." So he was happy doing that.
Yeah. He just, he saw an opportunity to have a career, and if it meant, switching up, it is what it is. But yeah, I think Drake now is doing like his political thing. He's set on that, and he's
doing his political thing.
He's doing his political thing, and I think he's content with what he's doing. So more power to him.
So what did you feel was a big difference between the next locker room environment and AEW's locker room environment, considering you did dark matches for both, or your tapings for both?
Yeah. Both were very similar in that so when you go backstage at like a Raw or a SmackDown, it's like a freeway of different people going in all directions. you're sort of like a little fly on a wall there, right? There's producers going this way, there's catering going this way, wrestlers going in every direction, you name it, all these types of talent, ring stage cans, all this stuff is going on all at once. So it's easy to get sort of lost in the shuffle. But at AEW and NXT, for that matter, it felt like just a bigger production of an indie type locker room. It felt more family friendly in that, like, you feel like you're part of a family as a talent when you're there. It's more tightly condensed as the location. Granted, that might be different now because those companies are back to filming in large venues again, but this was all during the COVID period. But I think more people are receptive at those at AEW and NXT to, like, for you to walk up to anyone and just ask questions. And at a TV taping for Raw or SmackDown, that's not what you're supposed to do. It's sort of a unwritten rule. You got to just sort of, hey, keep your eyes and ears open, your mouth shut. Don't bother anybody. Everyone is busy. Whereas here, you're not necessarily punished for walking up to the average person and saying, hey, nice to meet you. My name is Dave. If you don't mind, I'd love to just pick your brain or ask a quick question if you have some moments. You didn't get that vibe of, hey, don't do that when you're at AEW or NXT for that matter. Even NXT is a WWE product, but everything was done in the Performance Center in a very small, confined location. So you're basically next to everybody in a very small room, or a relatively small room. There's probably maybe 60 to 80 people there. And their locker room was essentially the back weight room. So, you had, like, Shawn Michaels was in the far corner by Gorilla. And then there's weights and cardio machines, and people are just sort of positioning themselves all over, stretching out, talking about their matches.
Was Regal there a lot of the time, or no?
Yeah, Regal was there at that point. Obviously, I think he just got recently released, but at that point, Regal was there. Terry Taylor was there. Shawn Michaels was there. Road Dogg. All those guys were there still at that point in October.
So, Evan, do you have a question that you'd like to ask Dave?
Yeah, up here.
I was just curious, what made you decide to leave during that 3 or 4 year break?
Oh, yeah. No, fair question. It was a couple different things. At that time, there was a mentality. I still had goals and aspirations for WWE at that time. But there was also this sort of unwritten, hey, you can't really make it in WWE after the age of 30, because they're always looking for guys in their early 20s. And I was turning 30 that year in 2014. So I always said, gosh, if I'm not making money in this business by 30, it doesn't seem like I'll have a chance to do anything. That was my mentality. And up until that point, there was nothing that said the indies were going to have this major boom, or that all these new companies would come out. And the business didn't look like it was headed in that direction at that point. So I had said, okay, I'm going to make an internal goal. I'm going to try to break through at some point by age 30. Additionally, my wife was pregnant with our second child. So I cared tremendously about being a good father. And I wanted
You'll
to
get
make
over
sure
that. Don't worry about it. You'll when they're 10, you'll be over all of it, because
they're almost there at that point. They're almost there now. But I was able to manage all my bookings with my son in those last 2012 to 14. But when another child's coming on the way, I had to think, okay, 2 kids now. It's a lot more on my plate. Will I be able to handle this? Plus, take indie bookings every weekend. Plus the chances of, guy in his 30s trying to make it into WWE, that all. So I think I had decided at that point, maybe I should just step away. I had my time, I had my fun. And then what turned me back onto it is I actually went to the first Cow Palace show that APW did. The first one was, I think, at the very beginning of 2017, and I took my kids to it. And my son, we got him ringside for Cody's entrance. I still have this on film, but Cody threw out a shirt, and my son was the one who caught it. And he had such a great time. He had asked me if Dad can wrestle. And then I'm thinking about, wow, my son wants to see me wrestle. I think I could still manage these bookings now that I've been a parent with 2 kids for a few years. I think I can manage it. And I know that when you are actively wrestling, it forces you, at least with my mentality, to always be in better shape and be more conscious of what you eat. I'll feel better when I'm in better shape for that kind of thing. And then I'm like, gosh, APW, when I left, was just running, they just broke out of the garage and they were running, buildings and getting about 350 people, which wasn't bad. But here I am at the Cow Palace and they have like 3,000 people. I'm like, look at what the indies are doing. There's opportunity everywhere. At that point, New Japan was on fire. There was a lot of, Jeff Cobb is a great buddy of mine. And Cobb went from just working APW shows to getting on Gorilla to getting Lucha Underground, moving from Lucha Underground to Ring of Honor, from Ring of Honor to New Japan. And these are guys that I traveled roads with, and now I see all this opportunity, and I'm like, gosh, there really is life for wrestlers in their, at least on the indies, in the 30s and onward. So I think there is a reason for me to at least attempt to come back, and that's what I did. After that show was over, I spent the whole rest of the year in 2017 getting back into ring shape. So that took me about 6 to 8 months to get into the shape that I consider to be acceptable. I don't really like to try to get into a ring if I look like, for me, just a little flabbiness is not acceptable. I try to be as tip-top shape as I possibly can. So, and then I started that angle at APW at the end of 2017, and then sort of full circle. The first Cow Palace show was when I decided to come back, and the second final Cow Palace show they did at the end of the year was when I sort of made my comeback. So
awesome.
I've got to go, Dave, but I just want to say
I do too, actually.
This show, we're paying tribute to Boom Boom Comini, of course, our brother who we lost the other day. And I'm looking here, he drew at a Christmas Chaos show in 2000, drew former Dilip Singh, who was great Khali in WWE. Not too shabby. All these matches with Samoa Joe, 2 big guys, and him teaming with Bison Smith, who Russ managed in APW. So we do pay tribute to him. I really want to thank you, Dave. The work story we got when you left for the brief time was, he was injured, injured severely. That's what they told all the marks. And nice cover up. But that's what some of us thought, it's a shoot. Maybe he did get injured, broke something or tore a
Dave,
ACL.
Before you leave, I did want to ask the Evan question that he always asks, which is, would you do it all over again, given everything that you've gone through and all the things that you've had happen? Would you do it all over again?
I think there are things you could always change, but I'm happy with where things are now. So to answer in short, I would do it all over again, because wrestling's been, relatively good. I haven't broke out and got a contract anywhere, but overall I've had a lot of great moments and memories and things. When I was just a young kid, I was like, man, it'd be great just to say I wrestled professionally. And now I'm like, got to meet some of my idols, backstage, and wrestle guys that I grew up watching on TV. Like just last night, again, I wrestled Psychosis. And I was a kid in high school watching Nitro, watching Rey Mysterio and Psychosis and Juventud, and just my mind being blown at that point, because I had never seen wrestlers like that before. And here I am now sharing a ring with them. So like these kind of things are really special to me. And regardless of what level of a wrestler you are in the industry, independent, contracted, major star, I would do it all over again, just for the fact of those kind of moments. So
that's great. Can you tell the fans how they could get in touch with you and what things you're promoting, what things are coming up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on all things social media. On Twitter, it's just at Dave Dutra. And then on Facebook and Instagram, it's at Battle King Dave Dutra. I post, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, but you'll always see which my upcoming events and bookings are. Primarily going to be in Northern California. I got another event coming in Fresno in 2 weeks. I got San Jose also in about 3 weeks.
So you'd say things are picking up in the indie scene now again after?
Yeah, things are opening up for sure. I had 4 bookings in the last 3 weeks. So I think pretty much everywhere. APW has not decided to run yet, which that's a tear to my eye a little bit, but I'd love to see them come back. But outside of them, pretty much every other promotion in California is back up and running, and momentum is really starting to pick up. I mean, in the last, again, I mentioned the last 3, maybe 4 shows I've done.
Let me know if you need a heel manager at all. Coming up.
You're not ready to.
My roster is quite thin at this point, so I'm always for new talent.
Yeah, man. But no, indies are great. So you can find me on all things social media again at Dave Dutra on Twitter, Battle King Dave Dutra on Facebook and Instagram. You could probably, I don't use YouTube too much anymore because more people it's all about putting up the little GIFs on Twitter and stuff, and people don't use YouTube as much. But
breaking my heart.
I guess it's better to have a viral 10-second GIF than it is to put up a 15-minute match these days. So but that's the best way to get at me. I'm pretty active on social media, so you'll always find out what my latest bookings are. You can chat with me, if you want to do a DM or something. Always open to those kind of things. So
well, Dave, it was really wonderful having you. Evan, you want to stay on for a couple extra minutes while we round out the show here?
Sure.
And we'll let you go, Dave. But thank you so much. We'd love to have you on in a future show.
Yeah, either one of you guys or Mike, just message me. Let me know. I'm happy to do these things. I love shooting or talking shop with wrestling. It's great. So appreciate you guys also staying up on your Sunday nights. So thank you again for having me, and you guys enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, you too. See you again soon. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So now it's just us.
All right.
The way that it's supposed to be. Back to normalcy. I wanted to take a few minutes out and talk about Boom Boom Comini because he was a wrestler that I managed. Mike said his career was basically over when I started managing him, which may have been kind of the case, but. Ayrron was a wrestler's wrestler. He was the kind of guy that you think about when you think about the side of beef kind of wrestler. Not a guy who was chiseled. He was never going to make it in the WWE because he never had the body type, and he looked a lot like Curly from the Three Stooges. But behind all of that was a guy that really had a high level of standards for quality of matches. And even though when I was paired up with him, I was a little upset because I'd been working with Mark Smith and I thought we had a really good working relationship. Me and Mark Smith and Vinny and Massaro, we had a really good tag team thing going on. The Sotello Syndicate was white hot. And then I was going from managing 2 guys, just managing 1 guy. And we got stuck on a lot of curtain jerking. Just me and Ayrron. Boom Boom were stuck on the first match off the card, and they weren't very inspired matches. They didn't have much of a storyline to them. He played an Arab, obviously, from the Middle East, and this was early part of 2001, which was not a problem. But come September 11th, 2001, it was a problem, and so we had to really get rid of the whole thing, and I basically stopped managing him then. But between then, when I started managing him and 2011, 9/11, we had a great match against Samoa Joe. So that's one of the big highlights is that Samoa Joe took a huge dive out on me and Boom Boom. And it was he had a really good mind about scripting a match and choreographing a show and making things in match have a storyline that was compelling and interesting to watch. And I think that's undervalued by a lot of people, but he didn't want to personally, even though he was stuck on a curtain jerking match, he didn't want himself to be part of a really bad performance. And so we always did fun matches and good routines and stuff like that going on, even though, the match itself was at the bottom of the card.
It's ironic the way wrestling has changed just listening to the show tonight. We in New York for the Tri-WF, we'd get guys like Pat Patterson headlining the Garden for the first time at age 40, or so, in that age range. And a lot of guys back then, their careers didn't peak until 35 or 40. So, to hear Dave say that WWE generally isn't interested in guys in their 30s, the business has really, really changed. And even what you just said, if you remember that Saudi pay-per-view recently, it was Roman Reigns and Goldberg in the opening match. Now the opening match is a big deal.
I just heard a rumor that Vince McMahon wants to get back in the ring at WrestleMania.
Oh, it's a circus. But
think about Shane, and Shane McMahon.
Shane would just scour the arena looking for the largest object to leap off of. But my point is, now the opening match is a big deal, and the business always evolves, and not necessarily for the better, because I've seen too many times where the opening match on the pay-per-view is the best match of the night, and everything, pales in comparison.
Goes downwards from there, absolutely, yeah. And that's awful.
I mean, the way I grew up is, the card was supposed to build.
The finale, the main event is what it's a crescendo. It's like a pyramid. You get to the top and you have your ultimate thing that everyone is looking forward to see. Otherwise, when you have your main event right at the front of the show, people just get up and leave, because when, you're having SD Jones against Uncle Elmer as your last match, people are like, nobody's going to want to stay around and watch that. Especially how long these pay-per-views are.
Now the theory is to get the TV crowd hot in the beginning of the match. So,
and they're thinking, well, they'll get the most eyes on it because it's the most prime time moment is when the match actually the show starts. And, you don't want to bore anyone to start with it, whereas when you're doing live shows, there's that concept that, well, everyone's going to be late for that first match and people are buying their popcorn and still finding their seats, but
still finding a parking spot.
Yeah, exactly. Or still trying to find the ATM to pay for the parking spot, as more correct. But so it was tough to lose him. It's tough to know somebody that you worked with side by side, every Saturday for months of your life, and you find he wasn't even, maybe he was 60 years old. I don't think he was. He was probably about 58 or 59. So he didn't even make 60, and it's just another. I would really, really, really like to go 3 months in the last 3 years without losing somebody I cared about. It's really been very tough for me.
Yeah. I've said it innumerable times on this show. I lost 6 friends in the past 2 years to COVID, and none of them were old, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. By today's standards, those are not, elderly people by any means. And it's been a rough stretch, and I just think it's important for whoever was a friend, family member, fan, whatever the case may be, to honor these guys. And whoever watches this and sees it's from your heart. I didn't personally know him, but you and Mike and Dave did. So while somebody's writing 5,000 words about a meaningless Raw tomorrow night, you devoted an entire show to acknowledge this guy. And
sure, yeah, and I'm going to write something for Pro Wrestling Stories about him as well. A summary of his career, because I think this is more people like Ayrron Boom Boom Comini than are like Hulk Hogan or that are like Bill Goldberg. There's more guys who wind up like him.
Well, what I always say about the indie guys is they've devoted their life to this. They've devoted, decades to being a pro wrestler, and they deserve to be acknowledged. You don't have to be quote unquote famous to deserve to be honored and acknowledged by people in the industry in whatever capacity. So when these clickbait bandits can't devote a couple of sentences to an indie wrestler dying because they have to promote $1 billion corporation instead. I think they have it ass backwards, to be honest.
But on a different side too, which is that in the indie wrestling stuff, there are people that you don't necessarily get along with. Okay, they're not your friends, and I would not say that Ayrron Comini was my friend. I never called him up and said, "Hey, let's go hang out," kind of thing. He wasn't my friend, right? But I respected him.
Yeah, mutual respect, guys.
Yeah, I respected what he did in the ring. I respected what he brought to a show, and that his level and his standards were high enough that he wouldn't give the fans a crappy match if he was involved in it. He just felt like that was something that there's a crowd of people. I remember him saying this to some of the younger guys, that, there's a crowd of people, even though there's only 50 people coming to the show tonight. Okay,
your best.
He wrestled in front of some terrible, terrible crowds, people with nobody there. I mean, where basically the members of the cast and crew outnumbered the audience. Okay, Angels Camp and a couple of places that are out in the middle of nowhere that we went to.
He still gave his best.
Yeah, he said, you know what? There's only 25 people or 50 people in there, but they spent their hard-earned money to be entertained tonight, and we're going to entertain them because they paid their good money to see us. I don't care if we get shorted tonight. I don't care if I don't get paid, but these people spent their money to see us entertain them, and we're going to entertain them tonight because that's what we do as professionals. And that someone had put on one of the wrestling groups I was in, what makes a good wrestler? And everyone's like, oh, the ability to sell, the ability to draw gate, that kind of thing. And I said, to me, what makes a great pro wrestler is if you perform your best in front of a crowd of 50 as you would in front of 50,000. You give the same kind of show and the same kind of effort to those 50 people that you would if you were on nationwide TV or international TV and seen by millions. You still give them that show. Then you're a professional. And Ayrron Comini was a professional.
Yeah, respect. I mean, any performer on any given night, the show must go on. It doesn't matter if you're sick, if you got stuff on your mind. It's like you go out there and you give 110%. And many times that's my objection to a WWE performer who half-asses it. Oh, it's just a house show. Meanwhile, ringside's $154 at Madison Square Garden. You still should give your best, even if it's not a pay-per-view or not a TV taping. And, you have some indie guy wrestling in front of 25 or 50 people and he's busting his ass. You have to respect that.
I did, and I respect Ayrron, and the world is a little bit of a darker place without him as part of it. Anyway, we'll catch everyone next week for next week's show.
Thank you so much. Note, the world is talking.
We've had too many of these notes for these shows. I mean, it's unfortunately becoming so routine. In fact, I was thinking about that when he was talking about the impact of Mike Lockwood. The death of Crash Holly was the first big wrestling death of somebody that I knew. And if you told me 20 years ago how many other people I'd be seeing die before my eyes, I would have never believed you.
It's a rough business, a brutal business. I tell people, I say the worst day of my life was the day my friend Tiger Khan died. He was one of my closest friends. And so every so often somebody will say, well, what about the day your dad died? And I said, Tiger was 33. My dad led a full life. I said, not that I didn't love my father, but this was one of my best friends.
The loss of potential, the loss of somebody being able to live out their life completely. And I unfortunately really understand.
And part of wrestling is going up and down those roads. I would go I would drive with Tiger New York to Pennsylvania, New York to God knows where, just so he'd have company during his bookings. And next thing you know, it's all over. Like in a blink, it's over. And it was a very hard thing to deal with. So, you have different relationships in wrestling, and they're all a loss. They're all a loss,
Well, let's hope we have something more positive to talk about next week. We'll see. You never know. Anyway,
AEW's pay-per-view. Those are always good.
We'll talk about that next week, and maybe we'll talk about Glenn Jacobs and all of his wonderful political musings, when we have a chance next week. It'll be fun stuff. But thanks so much for being part of the show. We'll see you next week. Good night.